Hello and welcome to this episode of Sewing with Mrs. B. We're up to the chain stitch, which in my little progression of lessons is lesson number 4. The chain stitch is mostly a decorative stitch. It's a stitch that looks pretty. And you can see here an example of the chain stitch. It looks like a succession of little chains or loops, one after the other. This little bit over here, where it looks like a flower, that's a chain stitch too, and I'll show you how to do that after we do the running chain stitch. Interestingly, if you flip over chain stitch, what you can see on the back is something that looks very similar to just a running stitch or maybe a back stitch. Although it looks complicated on the front, it's actually not that complicated at all. And you can do all kinds of pretty things with this stitch once you've mastered it. So, oh look, I've already started. Here's my little bit of felt, needle, thread, exactly the same as we'd start a running or back stitch. With a running stitch, we go forward, 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 but we're not going to do that this time. We're going to keep going back to the spot where we started. That's an important thing to note. You do need to be a little bit careful with felt, because if you hit the hole exactly, you can make the entire thing pull out. So we're going to just put the needle into the space right next to where our thread emerges. Before we do that though, we're going to make a little loop like this. We're going to lay the loop flat. Now, if you've managed to master the flat needle technique for the running stitch, you'll find this a little easier. You'll find it easier to keep your loops nice and evenly chained, and you'll just find you'll have to handle your fabric a bit less. So make a little loop and hold it there with your thumb, and then needle goes back almost to where you started, and then up. Loop that end around the top of the needle, and then very carefully pull it through, and use your thumb on this hand to keep the loop really steady. See, you've made a nice little loop that's lying flat and isn't pulling oddly. It's easy to go yank and then you get a little pucker, but you can always undo that if you just tuck it back again. So now that we've got our thread coming up from the top of the loop, we're going to repeat that. So make a nice little loop and then go back down almost to where you started, and take a stitch that's hopefully about the same length as your first chain and pull through, and then repeat. Oops, that one's a little short. And you can make this stitch curl gently around. So if you're decorating something that's not straight, oops. What I did there was that I accidentally caught one of the loops and tugged it a bit hard. If that happens, you can just work backwards to gently untug it, to loosen it, and there you go. Back to steady again. To finish this, and this is how you make the daisies that I'll show you in just a second, technique's exactly the same. Instead of taking a whole other stitch, when you get to your last chain, you're going to just do a little tiny securing stitch at the top, and then pull your needle through. And see, you've got a little securing stitch just there to hold it down. Now, I'm going to tie that off, and then I'm going to show you the daisy variation on this stitch, which is really pretty, and you can make these in all sorts of sizes, and of course you can use different colours. Okay. With the daisy, you want to decide where the middle of your flower needs to be for starters. And if you're working on a design that fits on a garment or that fits onto something else that you're making, say a decoration or, oh golly, I've done daisies on all sorts of things, clothes for my children and dolls' clothes. But anyway, you need to decide where the middle is and is going to be, because you're going to start from the middle and work each leaf or petal out. So for the sake of the exercise, please don't use a Sharpie. I'm using a Sharpie because it's what I have right there. There's the middle. So I'm going to start by coming up into that middle. I'm going to make a loop, come down almost in the same spot, make my first leaf, petal. Then pull it so it's flat. What you'll find over time is that if you pull the chain a little tighter, you'll get a narrower leaf, and if you leave it a bit looser, you'll get a wider leaf, and they're both okay. It's about what you like. And then we're going to do a little anchoring stitch there. We're going to go back to the middle. So as I said before, try not to come out right through the same hole that you've already made. On felt, you will eventually make a hole there. With other fabrics, it's less of a problem, but just be aware that that's a consequence of using the same hole too much. So now we're going to go around. Now, because I've done these quite a bit, I've got a pretty good sense of how big I want each of my petals or leaves to be. But if you're still kind of working it out, you can draw them onto your fabric. You're better to use a washable fabric marker or some chalk. Oh, and I haven't got a long enough thread. This type of stitch is fairly thread hungry, so you might find you need to rethread a couple of times. Oh no, I am going to run out. Oh dear, never mind. So if this was me doing something serious, using this for a particular purpose, I'd keep going around and I'd probably have another 3 petals or leaves coming off that particular daisy. There's a lovely little knot that you can do to fill in the centre with a contrasting colour, and I'll show you that in a separate video. It's called a French knot, and it's another embroidery stitch, and you can use these to embellish just about anything. Bye.